You want to get out your Bibles and turn to James chapter 4. James chapter 4, we'll be studying there in just a moment. Today we're going to be looking at the primary lesson that God has taught the world in the year 2020. I'd like to just read the verses to set us up. In chapter 4, verse 13 through 17. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow, we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. 2020 has certainly been a year for us to grow a little bit wiser. As we consider the things that have taken place this year, I want to make sure that we see the lessons that we're supposed to be learning from all of this, and that we hold on to those lessons moving forward. A lot of us have had plans completely ruined this year. Everything's been turned upside down. Everything's been changed. Nothing went like it was supposed to go. And so now here we sit at the end of this year looking forward to next year. Have we learned our lesson? 1 year ago today, we were oblivious to what was about to take place in the next year. But we set up all these plans and we had all these things in mind that we wanted to do, that we were going to accomplish, and we just saw them all fall apart. Did we learn the lesson as we move forward into 2021? Has our mindsets really changed? Maybe we had the right mindset all along, but maybe we've come to the realization that we didn't have the right mindset. And so now we probably need to adjust and maybe not assume that this next year is going to go exactly like we always thought that it would. And that's what this text is telling us, is that we should have had that mindset all along. Our mindset was wrong from the beginning. And so I'd like for us to just this morning take a look at this text and be reminded of this valuable truth and make sure that we're applying it as we make our plans going forward into next year. He starts off telling us that this is a message for planners. Notice how he introduces this. James says, come now. Come now. You get the picture of a father to the child. Come over here. I've got something to tell you. Now, typically, if my dad said that, I would be afraid. I've done something wrong here. Come now. Come on over here. I've got something to talk with you about. And he says, here's the people I want to come. You who say, today or tomorrow, we're going to go into such and such a town. We're going to spend a year there. We're going to trade, and we're going to make profit. That's the people who he wants to come. Now, was that us last year? Yes, we needed to hear this last year. Now we're hearing it to make sure we understand. Okay, you've learned this lesson. Now, come here if you're still oblivious to what happened in 2020 and thinking it's going to go like it was before and everything's going to be the same in the future as it always has been in the past. I want you to come and listen to what James is about to say. Now, what he says is, as he describes these plans, we have to recognize there's nothing wrong in these plans, right? To go into a city, to spend a year there, to trade, to make profit, none of those things are sinful, right? None of those things are wrong. There's nothing wrong with making plans. But James is calling them because there is a problem in this mentality, this planning mentality that he wants to address for these people, for us. First of all, he wants them to understand that they don't know what tomorrow will be like. He says, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. Do we really need to be reminded of this? How quickly can things change? You know, over the course of a year, we've seen a lot of change, but things kind of changed in a day. All of a sudden, no toilet paper. All of a sudden, grocery stores are missing bread and missing meat. All of a sudden, we're not allowed to go into restaurants anymore. All of a sudden, things change, and things didn't just keep going the way that they've always gone before. And maybe we thought that things would always continue the way they've always been. But he makes this point. You have no idea what tomorrow will bring. Now, if I'd have preached this lesson in 2019, you'd have said, yeah, but it's probably going to end up going the same as it's always been. Now have we learned? We have no idea what tomorrow will bring. Now that goes both ways, right? We don't know what bad is in store tomorrow. We don't know what good is in store tomorrow. We don't know. And it's just simply the recognition that we don't know the future. And we ought not be thinking that we know everything that's going to happen tomorrow. We can't plan for it. We don't know every possible scenario. And we can't plan for that. Even though we might think that we can. Even though we do all this work and have all this anxiety and we put all this effort into it, we don't know what tomorrow will be. And we can't figure it out. That's what Solomon points out in Ecclesiastes. You don't know what's going to happen the very next day. So why would we act as we do? As if we do. That self-confidence that our culture is pushing us to have is misplaced. We do not have what we think we have. We don't have a knowledge and understanding of the future. We could actually receive a phone call in the middle of this sermon that would completely turn our lives upside down and change everything going forward. We don't know what even today will bring. Then he says, what is your life? Isn't that an interesting question in verse 14? What is your life? How would we answer that question? What is my life? I might answer it a lot of different ways, but I probably wouldn't answer it the way James does. For you are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Remember, when we lived in South Florida, we would go up to Disney World, and it'd be hot. And whenever you're up there, you've got these little fans that are just blowing mist on you. And man, you can't wait as you're in the line to move up to the spot where the fan is. And you got the one guy that just stays there, and the line moves on, and he just sits there. And that was probably me. But imagine yourself as this little droplet of water that hits the fan, and you think, I'm great, I'm glorious, I'm solid, and everything's going to be this way forever. But you don't realize that all the droplets before you evaporated in that hot Florida sun before they ever even contacted anything. And all the droplets after you will do the same thing. And you are no different than every other droplet. You will evaporate. You will go away. And your time is like that. It's that short. This is the way he portrays your life. It's short. It's temporary. We are temporary. And we are weak. And we will disappear before we even know it. And he wants to bring that out for us to all consider and munch on as we start planning our future. How many lies do we tell ourselves about the future? I will certainly live all of this next year, and I'll do this and I'll do that. You sure? You know, a number of people have died this year who probably had plans for this Christmas. And they didn't make it to Christmas. They probably had plans for the next couple years, and they didn't make it to those years. Life is short. Life is temporary. Now, we don't like to hear that. That just sounds depressing. But here's James just being real with those of us who are just thinking we're going to make all these plans and do all these things, and everything's going to go well for us. He wants us to realize we don't know what tomorrow will bring, and our life is short and temporary. Interesting. As he continues, he says, instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. And he says, as it is, you boast in your arrogance. all such boasting is evil. Wow. How many of us thought the plans that maybe a college student would make, that I've graduated college, now I'm going to move into such and such a city, and I'm going to spend a year there, and I'm going to trade, and I'm going to make profit, and then I might start a family, and then I might do this, and then I might do that. Whoever thought that those kinds of plans would be considered boastful? And yet, that's the way James talks about them. As it is, you're boasting in your arrogance, and he says, all such boasting is evil. It's funny how we tend to think about our plans, and we believe in our plans that everything's going to happen the way that we want it to. And we don't even want to consider the what ifs. We just think, oh, that'll never happen. How many times do we say this or that will never happen when somebody says, well, what if this happened? What if? Oh, that'll never happen. Has this year shed light on the fact that we shouldn't be saying that will never happen? It can happen. The what ifs can happen. Now, does that mean that we should spend all of our time and our anxieties being worried about what could happen? I don't think that's what James is wanting us to do. But I think he wants us to recognize that we don't have the control that we think we have over our lives. And thinking we have that control and that power is arrogant. And it's completely false. When we don't consider all the what ifs, when we don't think about the fact that every bit of my plan can be foiled by a what if I can't even think of, what are we going to do when everything falls apart? What are we going to do when nothing goes as planned? In fact, it's the worst possible year of our lives, worse than 2020 and 2021. Will we blame God for not making our plans work out the way we wanted them to? It can lead to bitterness. I think James is trying to prepare us for that. You're being boastful, and pride goes before the fall. Don't be proud and boastful and arrogant, thinking that you have control and you can do everything, because you don't have the control you think you do. And really, he's trying to present before us a question that we need to ask ourselves. Who are we putting our faith in? Is our faith in ourselves? Are we thinking about what we can do and what we will do? Are we using earthly wisdom to accomplish our desires in our planning process? What he wants us to do is realize that we have no control and look to God. This reminds me of the parable we find in Luke 12 of the rich man who has this bumper crop. I mean, isn't that us, right? The first of 2020, man, stock market is at an all-time high. Everything's going great for us, and it seems like such a hopeful year, and we've got all this extra money, and what are we going to do with it? Oh, well, we'll build bigger barns, and we'll do this, and we'll have fun, and we'll enjoy life, and we'll say, you just need to sit back and enjoy life. And God says, you fool. This day your soul is required of you. He should have had a mindset that was focused on God, instead of a mindset that was just focused on his own wealth and his own prosperity. And he had all this faith in his own ability to stay alive and to do whatever he wants to do. He thought he was sovereign over his life, and he wasn't. How easy is this for us to do? How easy is it for us to forget that we don't really know what tomorrow will bring? That we're just temporary, that we're just this little mist that comes and goes, and that life is short. How easy is it for us to boast as though we know what's going to happen in the future? As we go into a new year, I hope that we understand these kinds of concepts, and I hope we can make wise decisions as we plan for our future. It's okay to plan for our future. And notice how James tells us we need to plan. Going back to verse 15, it says, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or do that. How many of us have heard that statement, that phrase, Lord willing, right? And it rolls off our tongue sometimes, and we just kind of get in the habit of saying, Lord willing. But is that all James wants us to do? It's okay if you make plans. If you say, I'm going to go here and I'm going to spend a year there and I'm going to spend and I'm going to make profit, Lord willing. Oh, well, now it's okay because you said Lord willing. Is that really all that he wants? He just wants that little statement, that little phrase at the end of your plans, and then you're good. Really? That's it? That's all I have to do? I think it actually goes a little bit deeper than that. It's not just, Lord willing, I've said that, now I can just go about my plans, and as long as I don't die, as long as God doesn't strike me, then I'm going to do all that. You see how that's just very self-focused. What it really is about is an acceptance of God's working and a trust in God and not in self. And I'm not bashing that. I think that's a good thing. We need to be saying that, but it needs to go deeper than that. It doesn't need to just be something we say. It needs to be something that we mean. It needs to be something that comes out of our heart, that our desire is for God's will to be done on earth, whether that means good in my life or bad in my life, whether that means my plans work out perfectly or my plans go a completely different direction. I want God's will to be done. And so as I say, I'm going to go into that place and I'm going to spend a year there. If as I say, I'm going to stay here for the next 30 years, 40 years, and preach here and be family with the people here, and we're going to grow and all this is going to happen, there's a recognition and understanding that I want God's will to be done more than I want my will to be done. And I'm okay with my plans being foiled if God is using my life for His glory. That's what it's about. That's what it's pointing to. Consider God's providence and God's working in the life of Joseph. Think for a minute about Joseph. What were Joseph's plans as he went to tell his brothers about, hey, father's checking in on you? Were his plans to be sold into slavery that day? Were his plans to be taken off to Egypt and to be sold into Potiphar's house? Were his plans to be second in command over Potiphar's house? No. Were his plans to be in prison because he was falsely accused? No. Were his plans to be second to Pharaoh? No. Were his plans to save all of his people? No. You imagine that had nothing to do with Joseph's way of life. Like that would not have been something he would have planned out for himself. Yet at the end, he says to his brothers, God meant this for good. God knew what was in store for me, and He desired to bring all these things about for good. What does that mean to us? As we consider our lives and our plans, we have no control over them, but the one who does is good. And if we're submitting and accepting whatever He wants in our lives, it will be okay. It will be okay. If He can use us in some way to glorify His name, my plans can go down the toilet. And I can go wherever and be whatever He wants me to be. I want to do this. I think this is where I should go and what I should do. But ultimately, I'm relying on God to make happen what He wants to make happen. There's also an example in Paul. As he's on missionary journeys, he reveals this in 2 Corinthians, that a door was opened to him. And you get the picture that, God is working and God has provided an opportunity for him to preach, and yet he chose not to. And so this kind of puts a different spin on this whole idea. A lot of people think, God's got a plan for me, and God's got a plan for you, and you don't know what that is, but you just trust Him, which is true. But there's also a recognition that it's okay if we say no to the opportunity, as long as our mindset is constantly focused on glorifying God and doing His will. So that it just kind of provides you an opposite approach or idea to thinking about what is God's will and how do I do God's will. Well, in some cases, it may not be evident what God is doing and we're suffering. In other cases, it may be evident and we may choose not to because we're really focused on what God is doing with us over here, in this place, in this way. We're not ready for that, and it's okay. I just thought that was fascinating. What do we seek? Notice the last verse that doesn't seem like it fits at all. Whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. This just doesn't seem like it fits at all. We've been talking all this time about planning. What does this have to do with planning? This is a verse that would be ingrained in our minds, and we'd be thinking about, he who knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, to him it is sin. But in this context, what he's trying to point out is they are sinning if they refuse to include God's work in their plans. I think it's a valuable lesson for us. You know the right thing to do. You know that your life is temporary and that you ought to be doing the right things while you're here, because if you refuse to do the right things, you're rebelling against God and you're sinning. And so he makes this very clear. If you're leaving God out of your plans and you're not doing the right things with your life, you're self-focused, you're selfishly ambitious, you're sinning, you're rebelling against God. Come now. Make a change to your plans and include God in them. What keeps us from doing the right things? Well, a lot of times as I think about my plans and the plans that I've had in the past, I've realized that I can oftentimes put off things. I'll get to that later. I've got all these other things in mind, and this is a year where I really just need to focus on me, and I need to make sure I've got what I need, and I need my profit, and I need to be more comfortable before I'm willing to go and do what He wants me to do. I can get to that later. You see how James' message helps us see we're temporary, and we don't know what tomorrow will bring. We may lose the opportunity to do what's right and stand in a place that is rebellious against God because we're refusing to do what God has commanded us to do. We can lie to ourselves and tell ourselves, well, we need to handle all these things first. When we don't. We need to be handling God's things first. We need to be working on the things that are around us and obviously the things that impact the well-being of our families and our livelihoods and things like that. But God is important and needs to be given priority in our lives. You see how that is a very clear statement in this text. Ultimately, he's calling for us to be faithful. That's really the point of the whole book. Faith without works is dead. If you say you have faith and you don't have works, you are not faithful. You are not doing what God has given you the command to do. I love the way Solomon put it in Proverbs 3:3-8. He says, "Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart, so you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones." You see the picture of faithfulness. And Solomon pointing to his sons and saying, don't ever let steadfast love and faithfulness leave you. Constantly be focusing on the faithful love of God and producing that in your own life. Let that be written on the tablet of your heart. Let your heart be transformed. Let your heart fully desire the will of God. And trust in Him with all your heart. Rely on Him to make your paths straight. This is something we must continually be thinking about and focusing on as we make decisions. Trusting in the Lord with all our hearts means that every minor and major decision in life is made with the understanding and the desire for God's will to be done on the earth. We trust His will. We trust His righteousness. We trust His oversight. We trust His providence. And we make decisions with Him in mind. Whenever we decide how we're going to treat our spouse, whenever we decide how we're going to treat our children, where we're going to work, where we're going to live, what we're going to do, our mindset must constantly be revolving around the will of God, trusting that if I'm focused on His will, He will work with me and help me to find the right path. We need to appreciate all that God is doing for us and be faithful. So as we think about the lessons we've learned this year, I hope that we understand James' message for us. That we in the past have been very proud and very boastful, but we must now be humble. Remember that question. What is your life? And remember James' answer. It's a vapor. It's a vapor. We can't say today or tomorrow we're going to do this or do that and know with absolute certainty that we're going to be given today or tomorrow. So whatever we decide to do, let us do it with an understanding that we're relying on God's grace to live each day, and that God wants us to do the work that He's given us to do. Earlier in chapter 4, James points out that the people are desiring different things. In verse 2 it says, "You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions." Notice the desire of their heart is to get the things that they want. They're selfishly ambitious. And James points it out. You could have what you want if you ask with the right motives. And if the things that you're asking for are with the right desires, the right heart, you want what God wants, you'll have what you want. Verse 6, he says, He gives more grace. Therefore it says, God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Our desires must be to humble ourselves before God and do the things He's called us to do. From this lesson, hopefully we learn that God's work is too important to be neglected. It's too important to be neglected. I don't know what your life was like this year. I don't know what work you were involved in. Imagine your work life was stressful, and you went through a lot of ups and downs. Some of you may have had the best year ever, and things have just gone great for you. But I hope you understand that if you weren't doing God's work this year, you may not have another year to do that. And your time could be up right now. And that's a scary thing. Because if you knew what was right and what you should have been doing, and you refused to do it, you're rebelling against God. We can't do that. We can't do that. God blesses us with life. Can you make yourself breathe? I can't. Whenever I'm asleep, I'm just trusting God to let me breathe. Can you make your heart beat? I can't do that. I can't make that happen. God holds it all in His hand. And He blesses us with another day of life. Let us use it for His glory, because we may not have tomorrow. Ultimately, we need the mindset of Paul. We read about in Philippians chapter 1. Paul is in prison, and he doesn't know what tomorrow will bring, but he's rejoicing because his mindset is to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Many of us might have the mindset to live is gain, and to die is Christ. But he says to live is Christ, to die is gain. Let that be our mentality moving forward into next year. you're here this morning and you've not received the grace of God, we want to encourage you and help you in any way we can. Before it's eternally too late, we want you to put your trust in Him. And as you're making plans for your future, we want to encourage you to have your mind focused on the will of God and the desires of God. And if you've not done that, we want to encourage you to repent and change before it's too late. There's plenty of work that we all can do in His kingdom. And if there's any way that we can help you with your work or help you with your salvation, please come as we stand and as we sing.